On True Echo, we bring you real stories that cut deep, speak truth, and remind us of what quiet strength really looks like. Today's story is one that shakes the system from the inside. A 72-year-old retired teacher steps into court just to tell the truth, but what happens next, no one saw coming. A violent act. A silent courtroom. And then, her son walks in. And not just any son. An FBI agent trained to make wrongs right. What he does next changes everything. Stay with us. The courthouse on Calhoun Street didn't expect trouble that morning. By 10 a.m., it was business as usual, minor civil hearings, parking citations, traffic violations. Courtroom 3B was half empty, and even the clerk looked half asleep. Until she walked in. Marlene Dupree didn't just enter, she arrived. At 72, she moved with the quiet authority of someone who had earned every wrinkle and every ounce of respect. Her silver hair was tied into a neat bun. Her blouse, crisp. No cane. No stumble. Just steady steps toward the witness stand. She didn't command attention with noise, she did it with presence. She wasn't the plaintiff or defendant. She was a witness. Nothing more. She had seen her neighbor, Mrs. Lenore Blake, get into a minor accident involving a city truck. Marlene had been sitting on her porch, clipping basil, when it happened. Her memory, sharpened by years of teaching children to pay attention to detail, remembered everything: the stop sign the truck ignored, the exact angle of the hit, even the make of the vehicle. It was supposed to be simple testimony. But in the corner of the room stood Officer Craig Renshaw, arms crossed, jaw set tight. He wasn't there for the case. He was scheduled to testify later in a separate hearing, but the moment Marlene began speaking, something in him twisted. His eyes narrowed. His shoulders squared. The calm of the courtroom thinned as he leaned forward. "This is false testimony," he barked. The room froze. Even the court reporter paused her typing. The judge, a weary man named Kellerman, blinked slowly and said, "Officer, please refrain." But Renshaw didn't stop. He stepped forward, uninvited. "She's lying," he said, pointing. "I know this woman. She's stirring things. She's trying to smear the department." The judge tried again. "Officer." But by then, it was too late. Renshaw took 3 steps forward. With no warning, no cause, no restraint, he slapped Marlene Dupree across the face. The sound echoed. It cut through courtroom whispers and silenced the world outside. A woman near the back gasped. The clerk's pen hit the floor. The bailiff froze. Marlene didn't scream. She turned her head with the blow, touched her cheek, and stared back at Renshaw, not with rage, not with fear, but with a look that made people look down in shame. The look of a woman who had seen too much to be shaken by a bully in uniform. And then, the double doors creaked open. He stepped in wearing a charcoal gray suit. Tie slightly loosened, sleeves half-rolled. No rush, but every movement carried intent. His name was Terrence Dupree. FBI. Special Agent. And he had flown in from D.C. the night before to surprise his mother. Only now, he stood motionless as he took in the scene, the red mark on her cheek, the cop's looming stance, the stunned silence. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. He walked forward, calmly flashing his badge. Terrence Dupree. Special Agent. FBI. His voice was low, controlled. The bailiff stepped back. The judge blinked again. Even Renshaw, who only seconds ago looked invincible, faltered. "Take 3 steps back," Terrence ordered, eyes locked on Renshaw. The officer hesitated, just enough for the room to feel the shift. Then he obeyed. Hands twitching at his sides, unsure whether to defend or submit. Terrence didn't yell. He didn't brandish his badge like a weapon. That's what made it more terrifying. Get internal affairs on the line, he said to the bailiff. Chain of custody on his body cam. I want the last 72 hours pulled. Judge Kellerman finally found his voice. Agent Dupree, are you taking over? I'm not here as a federal investigator, Terrence said, his eyes still locked on Renshaw. I'm here as a son who just watched a sworn officer assault a 72-year-old woman under oath. That's felony assault, Judge. Doesn't matter if I'm wearing a suit or combat gear. The courtroom had never felt smaller. Renshaw's shoulders were deflating. Terrence turned to his mother. Mama, are you hurt? Marlene shook her head. I'm all right, she whispered. Her voice steady, her back straight. The courtroom recessed, but the tension didn't. Outside, no reporters yet. No news vans. But inside, the truth had already started shaking the walls. And that was just the beginning. By the time Marlene sat down beside Terrence at the plaintiff's bench, the courtroom had emptied into hushed murmurs and sideways glances. The judge recessed. The clerks whispered. But no one looked at Renshaw anymore, not directly. Because now, everything had changed. Marlene sat tall, her shoulders unshaken. Terrence sat beside her, not just as her son, but as a line in the sand. The courtroom hadn't just witnessed a crime, it had witnessed a shift in gravity. And Renshaw? He stood in the middle of it, blinking, chest heaving like a man waking from a dream only to realize it's a nightmare. The kind you can't talk your way out of. Especially when the FBI is watching. After court adjourned, Terrence didn't waste time. He made calls. Not to friends, but to offices. To D.C. To Internal Affairs. To Civil Rights Division contacts who owed him favors. By the time he walked Marlene back to her car, the wheels were already turning. Inside the Tallahassee Police Department, Officer Renshaw's badge was already suspended, his gun turned in, and his desk cleared. The footage, captured by the courtroom security system and an eyewitness's phone, was under lock, backed up 3 times, and transmitted to the Bureau's digital forensic team. But what startled the department wasn't just that someone had acted. It was who had acted. Terrence wasn't some outsider stirring up headlines. He was the system. The one they claimed to serve. And he wasn't going away quietly. Still, he stayed close to his mother that day. In the back seat of her car, she finally spoke, voice soft like a hymn. You know, I've seen men like him before. Terrence nodded, eyes fixed on the passing trees outside the window. I know. They don't start loud. They start small. Smart. Like a crack in a teacup. His jaw tightened. You think he's cracked? No, she whispered. I think the cup's been broken a long time. They just kept pouring anyway. That night, she refused to stay in a hotel. This is my home, she said. I won't let one man make me feel unsafe in a house where I raised you, cooked 1,000 dinners, and buried your father. Terrence sat in the kitchen that evening as the kettle hissed. He didn't argue. He didn't even speak for a while. He just watched his mother place 2 cups of tea on the table, like it was just another night. But it wasn't. At 11:47 p.m., Terrence opened his laptop and accessed the internal IA system. There, buried in the archives, were 8 prior complaints against Officer Renshaw. 8. All dismissed. Some lacked evidence. Some were never followed up. One was from a 17-year-old boy named Darius Elkins. Terrence stared at the screen for a long time. Then he started digging. The next morning, Terrence visited Darius and his mother. They lived in a small apartment off West Pensacola Street. The moment Darius opened the door, Terrence saw the scar on his cheek. You don't know me, Terrence said. But I think I owe you a conversation. Inside, they sat at a wobbly kitchen table as Darius' mother poured orange juice and rubbed her hands over her apron like she was trying to scrub away years of being dismissed. He said my boy fit a description, she said, voice tight. Didn't say what. Didn't explain. Just slammed him against a cruiser for riding home from the Waffle House. Darius nodded slowly. I didn't fight back. Didn't talk. He still cuffed me. Terrence took out a notepad. Did you record anything? Blurry phone footage, his mother said. Didn't matter. Nobody cared. Terrence looked her in the eye. They care now. He took copies of the complaint, the time-stamped footage, and the medical record showing bruising on Darius' ribs. Back at headquarters, he placed the folder on Rachel Villarreal's desk. Rachel, a 17-year IA veteran, didn't even look surprised. We knew he had issues, she said quietly. But nobody pushed hard enough to make it stick. Terrence tapped the folder. It's sticking now. Rachel Villarreal sat with the folder for nearly 15 minutes before she said a word. Her office was small, dimly lit by a flickering overhead bulb and a window with blinds half bent. Terrence stood across from her, arms folded, jaw clenched, not from impatience, but from focus. You know what this means, Rachel finally said. If we pull this thread, we're going to find a whole sweater of rot underneath. I'm counting on it, Terrence replied. Because this doesn't end with a slap. It started long before that. Rachel opened the file, page by page. Renshaw's protected. Not officially. But you know the game, quiet transfers, supervisors that look the other way, complaint files shuffled into cabinets no one checks. But he hit a 72-year-old woman, Terrence reminded her. In court. On camera. Rachel sighed. And he still doesn't think he did anything wrong. That afternoon, she scheduled a formal internal review and notified the department's ethics board. But even before the paperwork was filed, word had already started spreading. Not because of press. Not because of policy. Because people were talking. Down at the precinct, the silence around Renshaw's name started to crack. A rookie named Andre Pritchard pulled Terrence aside in a hallway. I've seen him lose it, Andre whispered. At a gas station. At a teenager who looked at him the wrong way. Did you report it? Terrence asked. Andre shook his head. I didn't want to be marked. I'm still on probation. Terrence scribbled his name into a small notebook. Write it down now. I'll back you. Andre hesitated. Then nodded. That's when the tide shifted. The next morning, another officer came forward. Then another. Quietly. Carefully. Each with a story that matched the others, excessive language, threats during stops, unnecessary force. None enough to bring him down alone. But together? It painted a portrait of a man who thought his badge gave him permission instead of responsibility. Terrence met with a legal analyst from the Bureau's Civil Rights Division. If we build this right, the analyst said, this won't just be misconduct. It'll be pattern and practice. That's when Terrence knew. This wasn't just about Renshaw. This was about the system that kept him in uniform. Meanwhile, in Tallahassee, something subtle but powerful began to happen. Marlene's story reached people, not through headlines, but through whispers, church bulletins, text threads between cousins. It started with a potluck. Her church hosted it the night after the slap. No speeches. No press. Just people, former students, neighbors, fellow teachers, gathering not to fight, but to be near her. When she entered, wearing a soft lavender shawl and carrying a tray of deviled eggs, the room stilled. You didn't have to cook, Carolyn Fielding said as she hugged her. I didn't, Marlene replied. I needed to bring something that still felt like me. They didn't ask for details. They didn't push her to relive it. They just sat with her. Somebody from the back of the room said, "You always told us the world would test us one day." Marlene smiled faintly. Maybe. But the test ain't how you fall, it's how you answer. And that quiet defiance, that graceful steel, rippled through the community. At Macedonia Church the following Sunday, the pastor changed his sermon. He threw away the week's planned message and spoke instead about what it means to protect the truth, not with fists, but with presence. Miss Dupree didn't raise her voice, he said. She didn't strike back. But she reminded us that some truths don't need to shout. They just need to be seen. Across the city, signs began to appear. We stand with Marlene. Justice isn't optional. No one is above the badge. Not mass-produced. Not store-bought. Handmade. Crayons. Cardboard. Church fans with her name scrawled in marker. The courthouse steps became a place of quiet solidarity. Elderly women in their Sunday hats. Teenagers in hoodies. Teachers. Veterans. People who'd once been too tired, too afraid, too convinced that speaking up wouldn't change anything. Now they stood together. Not to yell. To witness. To say, we saw it. And we're not letting it slip away. Craig Renshaw sat in a plain white interrogation room at the Tallahassee Police Department, one wrist cuffed to a steel loop bolted into the table. The chain clinked every time his leg bounced, a nervous rhythm he couldn't silence. Across from him sat Rachel Villarreal, a pen in hand, a file already open. She didn't yell. She didn't lean in. She didn't need to. This report, she said, tapping the paper, refers to a physical assault against a civilian while testifying under oath. Witnessed by multiple court officials. Captured on video. Do you want to make a statement? Renshaw snorted. She lied under oath. I did what needed to be done. Rachel didn't react. You slapped a 72-year-old woman in a courtroom. With a bailiff standing 10 feet away. She was damaging the department, he muttered. Making us look bad. No, she said, calm as steel. You're what makes it look bad. Through the two-way glass, Terrence stood watching. Deputy Chief Clarence Braddock stood beside him, arms folded, face grim. This your first time seeing something like this from this side? Braddock asked. Terrence didn't take his eyes off Renshaw. Not my first. Just the first time it's personal. Be ready, Braddock said. There'll be statements, delays, maybe a media strategy. You know how departments protect their own. If they try to bury this, Terrence said, I'll take it federal in less than an hour. Braddock said nothing. Because he knew Terrence meant every word. Inside, Rachel slid a form across the table. Sign here if you want your statement recorded. If not, the suspension is immediate, and your badge stays revoked until further notice. Renshaw didn't sign. He just stared. Silent. Puffed up like he still thought he could outwait the storm. But the storm was already at his door. By the next morning, the internal affairs team had files, footage, statements, dozens of them. Some going back 5 years. Terrence built a timeline, complaint patterns, personnel records, patrol logs. A picture emerged, of a man who escalated conflict, not prevented it. But this wasn't just about Renshaw. This was about a system that knew, and let him keep going. Whispers turned into voices. A former court clerk, Margot Ellison, came forward publicly, saying she'd seen Renshaw intimidate people more than once. I never thought it would go that far, she said in a phone interview. But I'm not surprised. Then came Officer Corey Daniels. He'd worked with Renshaw on and off for 5 years. He had a temper, Daniels said. Wouldn't take orders. Always thought people were out to get him. We were told to keep an eye on him, but there was never enough. There's never enough until someone gets hurt. Terrence met with local reporters off the record. Quietly. Carefully. He didn't want this to become a tabloid circus. He wanted accuracy. He wanted accountability. He wanted the truth to land harder than any headline. Meanwhile, Marlene refused to speak publicly. No press. No camera crews on her porch. She still tutored kids from the neighborhood. Still walked to her front gate to get the mail every morning. But something in the city had shifted. People looked at her differently, not with pity, but with reverence. And in City Hall, at the next council meeting, they showed up. Standing room only. Not angry. Just present. One by one, citizens, some who hadn't been to a meeting in years, approached the mic. What are you doing to protect people who speak up? Why wasn't this officer flagged earlier? Why is it easier to report a pothole than a bad cop? It wasn't rage. It was a demand for answers. And from that pressure came motion. A proposal passed to create a civilian oversight board. Real power. Real access. No more brushing complaints under carpet corners. Change was still slow. But it had started. Back at the precinct, Rachel received an anonymous email. Subject, look inside. Attached, screenshots of a group chat between officers. Some mocked Marlene. Others defended her. But the message that stood out was one from a younger officer. If we don't clean house now, this whole place is gonna rot from the inside out. Terrence read that line 4 times. Not because it was poetic. Because it was honest. Because even inside the walls of that station, where silence had been tradition, the culture was breaking. And Renshaw? He sat in that sterile interrogation room, watching his reflection in the two-way mirror, slowly realizing. The badge wasn't going to save him this time. The air in courtroom 3B felt different. Same faded wood paneling. Same squeaky bench rows. Same judge behind the elevated desk. But the weight in the room? It had changed. Everyone who entered that morning could feel it, like the silence was listening now. Not the kind of silence that used to hide things. This one paid attention. Craig Renshaw entered through the side door, no longer in uniform, but in a cheap department-issued suit. No badge. No gun. Just a man walking into a room where the walls now knew the truth. He didn't look at anyone. And no one looked at him with sympathy. Marlene Dupree sat 5 rows back, in a navy blouse and simple earrings. Not in the front row. She had insisted. I'm not here to be a spectacle, she told Terrence. Let the truth stand by itself. She sat surrounded by former students, church members, and neighbors, people who had brought casseroles to her porch, who had once sat in her 5th grade classroom learning how to spell justice and mean it. Terrence was seated on the opposite side of the courtroom with the internal affairs team. He was not here as her son today. He was here as a federal witness. Still, his eyes never left her. Judge Kellerman called the hearing to order. We are here today to review the conduct of former Officer Craig Renshaw, whose suspension was enacted pending an investigation into misconduct, excessive force, and violation of civil rights. The room was quiet. No reporters. Just people. Waiting. The prosecutor, Denise Farland, sharp, poised, no nonsense, rose from her seat and began. Your Honor, we have footage. We have 4 sworn eyewitnesses. We have statements from fellow officers. And we have a federal agent who was present at the time of the assault. This is not a gray area. This is misconduct in its clearest form. And today, we begin the process of accountability. Renshaw's lawyer, pale and defensive, stood and tried to object. My client was under stress. The witness provoked him. Provoked him? Denise snapped, holding up a transcript. She was seated. Calm. Testifying about a traffic accident she witnessed. Your client crossed the courtroom and struck her across the face without provocation. The judge nodded for her to continue. Terrence was called first. He took the stand, raised his hand, swore in. His voice was calm. Steady. But his eyes burned. I walked in as the strike occurred, he said. I identified myself immediately. I secured the scene. I instructed the bailiff to call internal affairs. Did you witness any indication that the victim, Mrs. Dupree, posed a threat? No, Terence replied. She hadn't even raised her voice. She was answering a question when it happened. And the officer? Unprovoked. Visibly angry. Aggressive. Were you aware of any prior complaints against Officer Renshaw before this event? No, he said. But I investigated afterward. What I found was a pattern. The courtroom murmured. Denise let the silence hang, then nodded. Thank you, Agent Dupree. He stepped down. The judge turned to the gallery. Mrs. Dupree, would you like to make a statement? Marlene stood slowly. Not for show. Not for pity. Just to be seen. I've lived in Tallahassee for 72 years, she began. I've taught in public schools for over 3 decades. I've mentored teachers, raised a son, paid my taxes, and served my community. Her voice didn't rise. I've been in this courtroom before, to support neighbors, to help kids I once taught. But I never imagined that the only time I'd feel unsafe in here, would be because of the people sworn to protect it. She turned slightly toward Renshaw. He didn't look up. I'm not here to destroy anyone's life, she said. I'm here to ask, if we don't call this wrong, if we don't say it matters, then what message do we send to every young person watching? She sat down. Not a tear. Not a tremble. Just truth. The judge took a long pause before speaking. This court finds sufficient grounds to recommend former Officer Craig Renshaw for formal departmental charges. Additionally, we are forwarding this case to the State Attorney's Office for consideration of felony assault and civil rights violations. The gavel struck once. No cheers. No applause. Just a sharp crack, like a bell ringing at the end of something long overdue. Renshaw stood, face pale, jaw tight. He left with his attorney. No one followed. But everyone watched. Terence turned to his mother. She hadn't moved yet. She was still sitting perfectly upright, like a teacher at the end of a long parent conference. He leaned toward her. You okay? She nodded once. I'm not tired. I'm just settled. That night, Terence sat in her living room as the sun dipped behind the trees. The couch creaked under his weight, his tie undone, jacket folded over the armrest. Marlene poured them both a cup of tea. You surprised me that day, she said. Not by showing up. But by how you stayed calm. You made that room look at itself. He exhaled. I didn't feel calm. That's what made it matter. He stared at the cup in his hands. I've been thinking about leaving the bureau. Her brow rose. I keep wondering if I'm just part of the machine. If I'm helping fix it, or just keeping it running. She looked at him, soft, but firm. The badge is a tool, she said. The work is who you are. He swallowed. I'm tired. I know, she said. But tired isn't the end. It's just the pause before you decide what comes next. 5 days later, the city website posted a short, bureaucratic notice. Effective immediately, Craig Renshaw is dismissed from the Tallahassee Police Department following internal review and oversight recommendation. No further comment at this time. No apology. No press conference. Just a bland, official sentence. But in a town that had held its breath for too long, that sentence meant something. It meant someone had been heard. But by then, people weren't waiting on statements. They were already moving. The next city council meeting was packed again. Not with protesters, but with neighbors, teachers, coaches, librarians. They didn't come to yell. They came with proposals. How are complaints tracked? What protections are there for whistleblowers? Why aren't body cam videos made public automatically within 48 hours? Terrence didn't speak that night. He sat in the back row in plain clothes, watching the same community his mother had taught for decades now step into its own voice. One motion passed unanimously, a civilian review board. Real power. No more backdoor dismissals. No more silent cover-ups. It wasn't everything. But it was a start. Back at Marlene's house, things settled into rhythm. The porch light clicked on at 7 p.m. like it always had. The kitchen smelled of lemon oil and sweet cornbread. And Marlene went back to tutoring kids after school on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She didn't mention the slap again. Neither did the children she helped. But something had shifted in the way they watched her. They didn't just see a teacher anymore. They saw someone who stood still while the world tried to knock her down, and didn't flinch. One morning, a letter came in the mail. No return address. No signature. Just one typed sentence. You didn't raise your voice, and still you made the ground shake. Thank you. She folded it and slipped it into the back of her Bible. Before Terrence returned to D.C., he visited Darius Elkins. They sat outside the apartment, sharing fast food and warm silence. You think people like Renshaw ever really change? Darius asked. Terrence thought for a long moment. Some might. Most don't. But that's not the point. The point is making sure they can't keep doing what they do. Darius looked down at his fries. I want to be a teacher. Like Miss Dupree. She'd love that, Terrence said quietly. When he got back to his office, he filed a formal request to initiate a small internal pilot program. A task force that would allow officers to anonymously report early misconduct signs in their own ranks, before it escalated. He called it, the Dupree Protocol. No ribbon cutting. No ceremony. Just a clean, quiet file that would live inside the system, until the day someone else needed it. Months passed. People still argued over parking spaces. Still complained about potholes. Still forgot to return books to the library. But there was something different now in Tallahassee. Not fixed. But awakened. Kids at the Boys and Girls Club started asking questions like, what do you do when the person in charge is wrong, or, can someone like Miss Dupree get hurt and still be okay? And someone would always answer, yes. She already did. At TJ's diner, the regulars still gathered, but now, there was a printed photo on the wall near the register, Marlene at age 30, holding a classroom book with a smile so wide it looked like she could light the building. The waitress pointed to it one afternoon and said, that woman raised this whole town. And now the town finally stood up for her. And that was it. Not a revolution. A reminder. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay seated. Let a bully throw their punch. Then make sure the world watches what happens next. Marlene never wanted to be the center of anything. She didn't want her name trending, or her face in the paper. All she wanted to do was tell the truth about a car accident. But the world didn't let her be small that day. And instead of breaking, she stood taller. Not with rage. Not with noise. But with presence. And her son? He didn't come to save her. He came to see her. To listen. And sometimes, that's how real change begins. In a world where so many speak to be heard, Marlene Dupree reminds us of the quiet power of dignity. She didn't shout. She didn't retaliate. But her silence carried the weight of 1,000 stories just like hers. Her strength didn't just move her community, it moved the system. As Terrence said, the badge is a tool. The work is who you are. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone you love, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe to True Echo, where stories like this are told, not for noise, but for impact. Share this story. Leave a comment. Speak up. Because sometimes the smallest voices hold the greatest truths.